What's going on, everyone? This is a reflection video of the Bass Tracker. I'm going to try and have reflection videos after the end of each series on each boat. I've never really done it. I would like to talk about the successes and some of the problems. I'm going to give you a quick overview about it. Things I didn't tell you in the end reveal. And addressing some feedback. I got a lot of good feedback. I got a lot of objective feedback. Some of that's pretty valid, some pretty valid call-outs. I'll explain to you some of the problems we had. Some of the underlying problems that I don't necessarily tell you guys are happening because nobody wants like a drama queen. And I'll tell you a little bit now, but only because I think it'll be beneficial to you to watch out later. And then one of the bigger things I want to address before we even get into that is what a tiny boat is to me. I don't think I've ever actively done a video, but I'm going to briefly just highlight it here in this video. A tiny boat is to me what a tiny house is to somebody who builds like a tiny. That's where I got the training name. I mean, these people were building their own, essentially their own little self-made DIY motorhomes that were pretty sick looking. They looked like a little miniature house, but it was a motorhome. Like built on a trailer. It was like a travel trailer. They didn't build a motorhome, like built a travel trailer. All these people were building travel trailers or just miniature, houses that could travel. But they instead of calling them like a motorhome, they call it a tiny house. So the mark on that was you could have this awesome house that you built and it was your own personal spin and exactly how you wanted it, but you had to build it. That was like it. Or you couldn't call it a tiny house. You couldn't just go to an RV retailer and buy a travel trailer and then bring it around and be like, look at my tiny house. And nobody's going to take you seriously. As a pre-made, pre-manufactured home you bought that can travel. So that same thing kind of, I applied the same principle to the tiny boat name. That's where I got the tiny boat name. It's a DIY, built not bought by you, where you had at least some, if not all, the influence and time into building it. And then you can call it an actual tiny boat. It's a badge of honor to call it a tiny boat. You can't just like go to Academy Sports or Bass Pro and buy a Jon boat and be like, look at my tiny boat. It's not. It's a Jon boat. Just as like you bought the RV, it's a motorhome. You go and just buy a little Jon boat, it's a Jon boat. I mean, is it small? Is it tiny? Yeah, but it's not. You can have a boat that's tiny and still not have a tiny boat. Get it? That's my definition. I think it's been skewed. There's not a unilateral consensus on what a tiny boat is, but that's mine. That's what I meant when I made the name and when I made the Tiny Boat Nation, and I pushed for this idea to trend. This is where we came from. Moving on to the actual tracker. That was fun. One of my bigger things, if you're gonna do a boat that big, underestimation of materials and costs added in for just basic ground building materials. Severely underestimated. In using new things, like some of the things I had done before and I had a working knowledge of how to make those awesome, but there was some new things that I wasn't really familiar with working with. Pre-routed line turf, I was not a fan of. Like, I did not like it personally, because for line turf, it looks awesome. If you don't want to go and hand route stuff, like you don't even want to mess with that, but you want an awesome like line routed turf, that's fine as long as you're really meticulous and you think like 12 steps ahead of your build. Like I should have talked to Nate, because he's done line turf. He does mostly turf for people down in his region, and a lot of it's lined. And I should have just like sat down and talked to him, and been like, "What's your key to success here?" And so you're supposed to start from the middle, and go that way. And you're supposed to pre-plan your lids so they match the turf. And really, if you have a lid that falls right on the turf, like the line, it doesn't look quite right. So the lid has to be set in the middle of one of those lines of the turf. And like for it to look like, if you check out like Nate's Custom Boats or Nathaniel Leckholt on Instagram, you can see some of his boats. You see what he like pre-plans his hatches out. They have to be perfectly symmetrical. They can't be tapered. And that's another big thing. I made a lot of these hatches tapered because it makes more sense to make them tapered. There's a bigger opening entry. And I never really had to deal with that because I either carpeted the hatches, or when I did turf them, I routed my own turf, and so it was perfectly symmetrical because I made the lines. But like when you're accommodating to somebody else's like subjective routing, it was whatever. But the turf was really high quality though. It was much better. That's the ADDicT stuff. We sell pre-routed and then non-routed turf depending on how crazy you want your turf experience to be. Whether you want to just buy pre-routed turf. There's some very, very cool videos about that. But that was a problem. And then the other problem is, if you're going to buy pre-routed turf, you have to buy excess turf because the lines won't match up. If you're really OCD and you want the lines to match up, you're going to have to buy like a third more of the turf. Like 4 sheets, we calculated 4 sheets to be enough to do the entire boat, but you really need 6 sheets. Because you need to like you got to be willing to throw away a lot of it, because a lot of it's not going to be useful to you if you want it to line up perfectly. So we didn't do that because of the issues in shipping, because of the whole COVID crisis and just everything how it was being. It was just a very difficult time when we were building the boat right in the height of all that stuff happening. And then the time constraints, we just didn't go and get extra sheets of turf, so we made the 4 sheets work. There are consequences for that. None of it was bubbling up. Some people say that there was bubbling up. There's none of that. It was laid down flat, and it was adhered to, and it was all right. And that wasn't a problem. One of the other problems I had was just the time constraints, because time into making a boat that big and making it done right, like really when you're doing a tiny boat, it's constant problem solving, constant running into problems. Like you have this vision, okay, if nothing goes wrong, it should only take me a few hours or 6 hours to do this project. And then depending on the problems, that could take you a few days or 6 days to solve the problem. And when you're on time constraints, it sucks. Which is why I never want to do a boat for anybody else again, just FYI, because there's a lot of reasons. But the time constraints, boo. I don't want to do it. Like there was a point where, you know, Nick, my good buddy who came down, whose boat it actually was, I had already had it through months, and he wanted to fish. So he came down like when the boat was like 75-ish% done, and I wanted to like make like a note. The hardest part of the boat, the part that takes the longest, people wonder what part takes the longest. It's right when you think it's about to be done, because there are so many odds and ends in the last little bit of really high-end fabrication stuff that you're going to do to the boat. Takes the longest. The routing the turf, the applying the carpet, the making sure it all fits together, the fit to finish takes forever. The odds and ends that you couldn't get to, that you have to go back to now that you have other parts done to the boat, so that took a long time. So like Nick came down here, he's pretty nice, well-mannered, well-composed person, and over like the course of like, you know, 4 or 5 days that he was here, and we were just like, him and I worked nonstop on that boat in like serious heat. Like it was hot early on. Like he came during like a heat wave. Like he couldn't have came on a cool wave, because like immediately after he left it was like 80 degrees. It was like awesome. But you know, he was burnt out. He was like, just get it done. And I was like, no, calm down, we're gonna get it, it's gonna look good. You know, we were all kind of burnt out. The other thing was the deck, the front deck, like the wood stationary panels, which made a lot of sense. And specifically because this wasn't somebody's boat. This was like us trying to self-fund this boat, and we were going to use this boat really to launch our website. It was going to be one of the promoters, the launching website. So we're really gonna like launch the series. We're launch the series when we launch the site, and then we're obviously that's how it was going to be. So we were self-funding this, him and I, in on it. And then a lot of people obviously who found value in the project donated stuff to us. TH Marine donated a lot. Gatorback Bunks donated, and so there was a lot of donated materials in, which I think haven't cut down significantly on the cost, but there was still a lot of money in raw materials, building materials into the boat, which sunk us in. And then like, so we tried it, you know, I would have loved to do an all aluminum deck. I wouldn't have ran into some of the problems with where you see like, it looks like the hatches are shifting, but they're not. I'll talk about that later. Just the wood panel, like, so I bought a piece of wood, 3/4 piece of plywood, because 3/4 plus whatever we're going to add on was pretty much equivalent to the deck we're going to put on, and that worked. Scrapped it, got a new piece, and I like sifted through pieces. Like I like took off pieces to find like perfectly flat sheets. Needed 2 sheets to do it because the boat was so big and long. You had to actually attach pieces. Then I had it resin coated, and then it warped again. And like I let it dry in the shade. The sun wasn't even really on it, but I was just so hot outside. It warped again. I was like, you know what, screw it. At least it's warping the way so we can compress it down. And we compressed it down, like once sections of it were done, you couldn't reach in, and like it's not like we could fasten it with bolts. You had to use rivets, or you had to use countersink screws. And so we used countersink stainless steel last screws to hold down the whole thing. And parts of it didn't want to go like down all the way. And so it was do we push more and risk stripping out the screw and it's really going to bubble up, or do we leave it how it is? So there's just stages after stages where, like, I can think a few steps ahead, but I'm not a professional chess player. I can't solve it in a Rubik's Cube. So it started getting jammed up, some of these parts. It was a pretty complicated build. A lot of it was really now understanding the turf. The line turf needed you could really only use it in specific laws. I think it's not really meant for a complicated build with tapered hatches like that contoured toward the side of the hull like we did. And you need a lot of it. And then just even if I had all the turf, I had turf to throw away and line up everything perfectly, it was still a gigantic pain. I'm gonna talk about the strengths and weaknesses of line turf later. I'm gonna do that entire video. But that was wearing down in conjunction with the time constraints, because he was already 1 or 2 days delayed in going back home. He had an agenda, he has a job, he has a wife. It just wore us out. So he had worked all day and night to like really get it to the debut part of it, and like we worked all through the night into the morning, and at 4 in the morning we're like, do you want to go to bed or you want to go and debut it? So he's like, no, let's go fish. And so we fished, and then we went home. And and then he slept, and then he took off as I went. So he was happy. Just know that like it wasn't a customer's boat, it was his boat, and he was there actively partaking in the last little bit of it. And he left the boat. He was happy. Like I talked to him, I was like, you want to take care of some of these things? Like, no, I like it, I love it, I'm taking it. And so he was happy, and there was a mutual consensus between us that it was okay. And then some of the things we'll take care of later, because he's gonna come back. He's like my friend and business partner, he'll be back here. So anything that needs to be taken care of later after the trial run, we'll get back in. But I know like the deck looks like it shifts on the right side, like there's that shadow casted on by the lights, but really you can't tell. Like you can't tell, nobody can tell if you're like actually on it and stepping on it. What was very odd though is in the light, the turf looked different colors like we bought 4 consistent sheets. They were not all the same shade. Kind of was really a pain. I really dislike line turf. I don't like it. Me though. But there are so many people that make awesome line turf boats that I'm like, that looks badass. So I mean, I guess it's all up to the person, how meticulous you are and what kind of builder you are and what your style is. But those are some of the problems I ran, the main problems. And so other than like sheer underestimation of materials into the boat, and then the time constraint really squeezed me. Aside from all that, we still got it done and we got it out. But it was different. And obviously that dictates a lot of where my channel is going to go. So no longer, obviously that was for a friend and a buddy. Most of the videos that I've ever done for people were friends. And so, but from now on, like the audience is going to dictate the boat. The future of this channel cannot be dictated by one person. So if I take on anybody's boat, whether it's a friend or rather it's like somebody who like offers me a ton of money, which money is not really I don't even need somebody else's money anymore because of you guys. So why would I even do that? Like that would really, then somebody would be dictating what happens solely on this channel. And people have been asking for this channel to go in different directions. I'm like, that would be really awesome, but I can't. And so I've taken boats on. I only have 1 boat in my garage left, and that's because I just didn't know where I would be starting out full time, and I wanted to start out solid. But now that I'm really solid and established, I don't need to take on anybody else's boat. So there will be polls from now on, and they will be specifically audience driven. So you guys will dictate what happens on this channel. And I also want to make another DIY channel because there's these slackers on YouTube that are alleged kings of DIY. I can outcompete all these chumps. There's just no good competition out there. But I'm going to bring it to them through like a different channel. Like this is a very specific channel for the DIY fishing community, but I want a more universal DIY channel. I feel like I can really crunch on that because I have universal DIY videos on this channel that don't necessarily trend with this channel's basic interests, but over time people have seen them and they outcompete channels where that's like the regular thing. I mean, so I want to be a DIY creator of sorts. That's my bigger. I will always have this profound, enthusiasm and more or less an addiction to fishing, and that's going to drive the thriving force. This will always be a main channel, but it can't like be the only channel. But as a full-time creator, I should be able to maintain both channels. It was impossible to do it before, having a job, and we also have some other cool things coming out. I'll talk about all those things later, but my phone's about to die. So thank you much for this video. I hope it was beneficial. It was a good time talking to you guys. Let me know what you think about these vlogs and if you want more of them. See ya.